Fertilizer markets are navigating a prolonged disruption, with the Strait of Hormuz now closed for a 12th straight week. Despite fears of supply shortages during the critical spring season, global markets have held up better than expected, though prices remain elevated and underlying risks haven't gone away. I'm Johanna Bota, and joining us today to help make sense of it all is Josh Linville, VP of Fertilizer at StoneX. Good to see you again, Josh. We are now 3 months into the strait closure, and so far we haven't seen any major supply outages. What's been the biggest surprise in how resilient this market has been?
Yeah, 12 weeks. I mean, if you'd said at the very beginning of this situation, the fact that it ended in the end of February, or it's beginning of the end of February, the fact that the strait would remain almost completely closed, the fact that all this started right before the Northern Hemisphere spring season, if you'd told me you're going to get to 12 weeks later, not only is the strait going to be still closed, but you're not going to hear anybody in the world say, I went without my fertilizer, I would have told you there's no way in the world that happens. But that's where we are. Here we are 12 weeks later. And really, you look around the world, we have heard nobody say, I cannot find my urea. In fact, India is a great example of how resilient it is. Now, yeah, their purchase tender, the shipment window went well through the month of June. They had a long, long time for these people to share, but they got 2.5 million ton with no problem. I do believe a little bit of it's helped by lack of Aussie demand. Those imports, that demand point has just been much, much lower. But then again, when you look at them on a global scale, it's not really the price mover some folks like to make it out to be. It's a help, but it's not going to be something that massively changes the marketplace. We are thinking that there's probably a little bit of demand destruction, something we've always talked about, but nobody in their right mind would ever cut back willingly on nitrogen application rate because there's a
Right.
direct correlation between nitrogen and yield.
Hmm.
This year, I think farmers around the world are so financially stressed. They said, fine, if I'm putting on, let's just say 250 pounds, let's scale it back a little bit. 230, 225. That doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start to take that small percentage over the entire global marketplace, that becomes a very, very big number. So the market seems to have figured itself out. Phosphate, we think there's massive demand destruction. When you look around the world, that price has made very little sense. We've continued to say that we think the impact on the phosphate market due to the strait and everything else in the world is far worse than everything we see in the nitrogen world. Yet again, no problems with supply out there. And I just think that's the farmer pushing back and saying, listen, this doesn't make sense. I can mine my ground or I can just go without a little bit. We can start to scale back the application rate. Maybe it hurts my yield, maybe it doesn't. We're all going to find out this fall. So we've gone through. That does not mean things cannot happen in the future. The longer this goes on, don't sleep on it. We're moving into a very, very slow period of the year, right? You get to our summertime, northern hemisphere summertime, there is very little that happens from a demand standpoint. So it can get slow, but the longer the strait remains closed, the higher the chance that there's going to be a disruption. We may not see it until later on this year. We may not see it until spring 27, but we do have to keep our eyes open. Do not get lulled to sleep just because nothing has happened today.
Right. Okay, so we've got supply holding up for now. So it really comes down to demand, like you said. Let's talk about one of the biggest buyers, which you mentioned earlier. Could India be back in the market sooner than we think?
I think it's very, very possible. Now, again, they just got done buying that 2.5 million ton block, and everybody thought, hey, they're good. They don't need anything for a while. And I'm going off memory, so don't crucify me here if I'm wrong on the date. But I think that shipment window went through June 24th. Well, you would think, okay, they don't need to do another tender until they get those tons in. I don't know that that's the case. They probably went into that last tender with an idea that, hey, this strait will be open on X date. And that hasn't happened so far. Not only does that mean the world is still tight on urea, it also means that they're still struggling to find LNG, the gas inputs to run their own domestic plants.
Hmm.
And remember, the Indian buyer, the Indian farmer is far different than everybody else in the world. Everybody else is struggling with the high price and tight supplies and all this stuff. The Indian farmer is twiddling their thumb saying, I don't care what's going on. The government takes care of it. My price stays low, and they sure as heck better make sure that supplies are in place when I need it. They know that, and the government knows that. So the government's seen a few tenders where they've really struggled. They've been trying to play catch up, and the world's taking advantage of them. You could see a situation where they come back into the marketplace here in a few weeks. As far as a short term situation, that is one thing we're watching very, very closely. If they come back with a new tender, the other one is that Aussie demand comes back because otherwise you're starting to look at South America demand, and that could be months off.
Okay, so then let's look ahead. What are the key watch points across all the major fertilizer markets right now?
Yeah, I tried to boil this down. There's a ton of things we need to watch, just demand cycles and, demand rates and stuff like that. But let's just try and bake it down to the nitty gritty. When we look at urea, there are two things I watch. Number one is the Strait of Hormuz, because again, you're talking about a third of the world's exports and you're talking about all the LNG exports. It's also Chinese exports. Don't forget, China, being one of the largest exporters normally speaking, are saying they're not going to export again until August. With everything going on, it wouldn't surprise me at all to wake up one morning and find out they've changed their mind and they're exporting quickly. UAN, again, it's going to be very, very tied to the urea marketplace, but we've got to watch Russia. What can they or can they not export?
Hmm.
On the anhydrous side, again, it goes back to the Strait of Hormuz and it goes back to Russia. Russia being the historically leading exporter of anhydrous by a ton
Yeah.
over second place. They're just not there because they upset Ukraine. They're invading them. So they lost that chain. Phosphate market. Again, we go back to the Strait of Hormuz. We go back to China export flows and we go to global production rates. The longer the strait's closed, not only does that mean no Saudi Arabia exports, it means very little to no sulfur exports. It means three of the world's anhydrous exporters are stuck behind there. A lot of impacts there. So three things we need to watch. Potash, it really comes down to grain values around the world, because if grain values go up, I think potash follows. And it's also freight rates. It's been a very steady market, but vessel freight rates, rail, truck. I know it takes a lot more for you and I to drive to the office every day and back. It's just transportation costs a lot more, and that gets baked into the price. So you can start to see higher values from just that side of it. And then anything sulfur. We don't usually talk a lot about sulfur, but I think we need to start talking about it. Any sulfur based fertilizer, watch the Strait of Hormuz. When you talk about losing half of the world's tradable supply of sulfur, that matters. Anything that's sulfur based, anything that's got sulfur in it, is going to be impacted. We need to watch how quickly that reopens.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is basically these two wars really need to figure themselves out because between Iran and Russia, I mean, they're creating all the problems. Josh,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your valuable insight. And thank you to our viewers for watching. For more financial content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.